But yeah, this is the people link me this, and Trump is going to deport 13 million people. Man.
$315 billion. That's one staggering cost estimate for Donald Trump's signature campaign promise.
The largest domestic deportation operation in American history.
I think people would support that. Even knowing how much it costs, I think that a lot of his supporters would be in favor of that.
Conservative estimates are still enormous. One group puts it at $162 billion.
It's not
That's
so
more
bad.
than the government spent on most federal agencies in fiscal year 2024.
Yeah, again, that's what a lot of people, yeah, exactly, get rid of those and deport people instead. Yeah, that's what I think people want.
Explain why an operation of this scale could require hundreds of billions of dollars over the course of a decade.
Is it your plan to deport everyone who is here illegally over the next 4 years?
Well, I think you have to do it, and it's a very tough thing to do.
That means roughly 13 million immigrants who entered the country illegally are at risk of deportation.
That's right.
About 4% of the U.S. population.
Oh.
To put that into perspective, the entire U.S. prison and jail population in 2022 was around 1.9 million people.
Scale is difficult for the government to carry out.
I'm going to be really shocked if they can actually deport that many people. I think what's going to end up happening is that they're going to deport, like, they're obviously going to do priority deportations, right? Where they're not going to immediately start deporting grandmas that have been here for 50 years. They're going to probably start deporting people that are, you know, young people that have committed crimes. I will be shocked if they end up deporting everybody.
Jacqueline Melnick is a senior fellow at the American Immigration Council, a liberal immigration group.
Trump would have to do more than quadruple current ICE removals of people arrested in the interior just to hit the levels that we've seen previously under Obama.
I think that you take a sequential approach to it. You start with what's achievable. Let's start with 1 million.
The details of the plan are still being worked out.
He's right. That's the right way to go about it.
But let's say Trump does decide to deport 1 million people a year. That could still cost about $88 billion annually and take 11 years, according to one estimate. And that's assuming 20% of people would leave on their own.
Yes, it's expensive, but the trade-offs, I think, are well worth it.
Ron Vitello led
I think that if you interviewed the majority of people that are like Trump supporters, I think that they would overwhelmingly support that. I mean, I'm just making this up, right? But like, if like this is like my temperature check, I think that almost all of them would support that, even if the cost was astronomical.
The Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, known as ICE, for a year in Trump's first term.
Right now, the government is underfunded for its ability to detain people. To be able to accomplish this and the border mission simultaneously will require a reallocation, if not an infusion for resources.
Other immigration experts say the actual cost of Trump's mass deportation plan will be much lower than the American Immigration Council's estimate of $315 billion.
A more robust enforcement like...
Well, it would be logical that their interpretation of how much it would cost would be higher because they're probably in favor of some degree of illegal immigration if they're like a liberal mindset. I think that that's generally how like the party lines are for like these different topics. So it would logically make sense that they would come up with a higher number because a higher number would make the plan seem less feasible. So I wouldn't necessarily trust that number to begin with.
Administration is contemplating may create significant economies of scale.
Stephen Camarata is the director of research at the Center for Immigration Studies, a group favoring immigration restrictions that helped staff Trump's first term.
Once you start doing it and you get an infrastructure in place, then it might be a lot cheaper.
Deportation starts with arrest.
He brings up a good point that like a lot of it is getting the system started and the cost of doing that. And like that system start cost is like kind of a fixed cost that's like amortized across all of the amount of effort that's going to be put into it.
Targeted arrest. We'll know who we're going to arrest, where we're most likely to find them based on numerous investigative processes.
We're starting with the criminals, and we got to do it. And then we're starting with others.
Trump says dreamers, or people who entered the U.S. illegally as children, might be an exception. To make arrests, ICE officers would either identify someone who's already in a jail or prison, or go to a person's home.
Yeah, of course.
the door.
The majority of undocumented immigrants are not in law enforcement custody. Most of them have never committed any offenses.
Arresting people out in the community, known as at-large arrests, isn't a common tactic for ICE. Vitello says it's more—
I think that's what people want to change, because they don't think that it's proactive enough. They committed an offense when they came here illegally. Well, what he's saying is that they never got arrested by the police.
more logistically complicated and more expensive, but it's at the center of the Trump administration.
I'm not concerned that they won't be able to find them. It's just a matter of time, given the circumstances, given the availability of information, and given the resources in play.
At-large arrests often require multiple federal agents and take several days because ICE officers don't generally have warrants.
Immigration violations are not criminal, which means that a judicial warrant to arrest them would not have probable cause. They might have to wait hours for the person to leave their house. They might have to stake out a work site.
To carry out arrests at this scale, the American Immigration Council estimates ICE would need to hire over 30,000 new law enforcement agents and staff, making it the largest law enforcement agency in the federal government.
That's a lot.
Vitello says this number is overstated, and that state and local law enforcement could be directed via task forces to help with at-large arrests.
I think a lot of people would sign up to do it too. Yeah, I do. I actually think that a lot of the media vastly underestimates how many people just want to get the illegal immigrants out of the fucking country. I don't think that they really care if you're a dreamer, if you're, you know, a criminal. I don't think that most people really give a shit at this point. I think maybe if you looked at this issue in 2020 or like 2016, people probably did care more, or at least they pretended to care. I think now they don't.
They already do.
Having that referral system, having state and locals help ICE officers do their job. Better to have it than not, but not definitive in whether they do the work or not.
Then there's detention, the most expensive part of the whole process. It costs around $200 a day to hold someone in ICE custody. Congress has provided enough funding for at least 41,500 detention beds in fiscal year 2025. But that's not nearly enough to detain 1 million people a year. According to the American Immigration Council, ICE would need to construct 216 soft-sided facilities every year for 11 years.
That's a lot.
Soft-sided facilities are temporary tent-like structures that have typically been used near the border. Anyone not physically detained would be placed on electronic surveillance, which costs approximately $4 per person per day. Private contractors involved in every stage of the detention process could drive up prices even more.
Contractors drive people in between ICE detention centers or drive the vans after somebody's arrested.
Detaining children would also make this process more expensive.
I don't want to be breaking up families, so the only way you don't break up the family is you keep them together and you have to send them all back.
Family.
Oh, man. Wild? Yeah. Well, here's the thing. As I said, I think this issue and the amount, like the level of radicalization people have displayed on this issue, I think is really indicative of what's to come. I think it is. I'm not mad. Bye-bye. Yeah, I actually think that, like, if you go and you read the comments on this, let me see what the $2 trillion spent in Afghanistan. How does it cost $200 to keep somebody in a cage? This will be a huge cash grab for private contractors. Why does Trump need any funding at all? Let the employers who break federal law pay for it. The government's not overfunded, it's overspending. Imagine creating a problem so big it'll be too expensive to fix. Almost all of these comments are agreeing. They're almost all positive.
Detention is the most expensive kind of detention because the U.S. government is required to give people minimum standards, and those children need to have child welfare professionals on site. They need to have pediatricians on site. There needs to be a provision for them to get schooling if they are going to be held for months or potentially years at a time.
Vitello says one way the government could reduce costs is by repurposing existing...
I've got a feeling that there are a lot of people out there that don't think that's as important as he does.
Detention centers like Guantanamo Bay.
A third country like a Panama, potentially Mexico, could agree to hold third country nationals so that their due process could be adjudicated, thereby lowering the costs and kind of sending a message down the pipeline that people are not going to be released into the United States to await those adjudications. That alone will reduce the number of individuals trying to cross the border illegally.
Camerata says there are over 1 million immigrants who could be detained at a much lower cost.
There are people with a final order of removal that we just never made leave. Those individuals shouldn't have to be held long. We can get them out.
That's obviously what they're going to do. They're going to, obviously you go for the low-hanging fruit. I mean, duh. It's the same with anything, right?
After detention comes legal processing, which immigration law experts say is the biggest bottleneck in the mass deportation process. An additional 10.6 million cases would require nearly 2,000 more immigration judges and over 1,100 more courtrooms.
There is not only a cost in the immigration court side, but there's also a cost in the ICE side in getting these new prosecutors online. You need support staff for the judges, judicial law clerks, secretaries.
Staffing on...
I don't think that a lot of people care about that as much, and I think that they'll probably end up skipping a lot of that, and nobody's going to give a shit.
Both sides leads each case to cost over $2,500.
Bukele?
To set up new courtrooms quickly, the government would likely construct tent courts, like those built in 2019 to implement the migrant protection protocols. This was when immigrants living in the U.S. illegally were returned to Mexico to wait for the duration of their court proceedings. They went to tent courts near the border to virtually appear in front of judges.
You could do those hearings much faster, logistically get more judges and more hearings heard in a day.
As with finding new efficiencies in detention space, that is another thing that has its limits.
Tent-style courtrooms in Laredo, Texas, cost about $16 million to build and $143 million annually.
This is my opinion about this. We spend $1 trillion on the military. So when I see numbers like this and I'm being told that, like, this isn't possible, how many $1 billion are we spending on, like, foreign aid to random fucking countries? Stop doing that. Just stop it. Unless we're, like, legally obligated through NATO or something, stop doing it.
Once a person receives a final removal order, they have to either report for deportation at a later date or wait in detention until then.
At that point, the U.S. government has to actually arrange the removal. That would involve putting them on a bus and sending them to Mexico. But if they're from any other country other than Canada, that means putting them on a plane and flying them to their ultimate destination.
An operation of this scale could require over 6,000 removal flights per year. For comparison, ICE had around 1,200 removal flights in fiscal year 2023. The average ICE removal flight costs about $17,000 per hour. This number could go up if private contractors who provide ICE with planes and pilots raise their prices.
But there are other assets, right? ICE has its...
I do think also the government should try to recoup these costs by fining the companies that have been hiring these people. Because, like, really it takes two to tango. And in a lot of cases, the reason why these people exist in the United States and they're basically just, like, you know, able to, like, make money is because companies and individuals pay them under the table. And so, like, really, who should be paying for this? Well, it should be the companies that willingly hire people and knowingly hire people that are here illegally. It's that simple.
Number of its own aircraft that are already in service today. The Justice Department, the Marshal Service, has their own transportation aircraft. The scale-up need could come from the military.
Trump told NBC News in November that there is no price tag for his plan. Camerata says...
I think that's what people want. Or at least, like, the ones that agree with him, right? There's people who think this is bad, but, like, the ones that agree with him, I don't think that they care about the price.
Cost will likely be spread out over several years because it would be impractical to deport even 1 million people a year, let alone all 13 million in a single one-time operation.
In this case, it's probably hyperbole. What I think he's trying to do is tell everyone, when I take over, the immigration law is going to be back in business. And I think it's going to have a big effect, and then it's going to be up to the public to judge whether he kept his word.
But getting enough funding from Congress will be crucial for an operation of...
I think what's going to happen is that he is probably going to get, like, maybe 20% or 30% of them, and it's probably going to be a lot of the problem people, and then the rest of them probably... It depends on what happens, like, who gets elected after Trump, right? And so, like, if somebody like Trump gets reelected again, then you'll see more of them get deported. If they don't, then you won't see more of them get deported, right? I think it's really just that simple.
Senate Republicans have said that passing a border funding bill will be the top priority next year.
Border security, more bed spaces so you don't have to release people that shouldn't be released, and more ICE agents to deport people who represent a threat to our country and shouldn't be here to begin with.
Republicans control both chambers of Congress next term, but it's a narrow majority, making spending on this scale no guarantee.
To my Democratic friends, I think if you resist rational deportation policy, you do so at your own peril.
I actually think he's right. And I think that what he said isn't actually accurate entirely, or it's not telling the full picture. I think that if you resist rational deportation policy, you will then get irrational deportation policy. And I think that like that's really where things are going, and that's what I think is going to happen. Only the rich stemps well. Well, I don't know, but I think that's what it is, and that's why I think a lot of people are so extreme about it now. Is that I think people are tired of being called like a, you know, like somebody said, like it's like you're a Nazi, right, for like wanting to deport an illegal immigrant. I think that like somebody hears that and they're like, I don't want to be called the Nazi. That's stupid. And so I'm just going to vote against you, right? I don't think people like that type of emotional blackmail, and it's what really causes a lot of people to push back on it. So yeah. And also, like, and this is something that's like not really discussed a lot, is that a lot of the people who are illegal immigrants, they get taken advantage of in a lot of big ways. And, you know, it's like if they get shortchanged, they don't get paid enough money, you know, they're not being paid fairly. What do they go and do about it? Like, you know, they can't go to the police. They can't sue the person. Excuse me. They can't do anything. So they're in a massive, there's like a massive power imbalance there. And I think that that's something that a lot of people need to realize.